Thank you very much. Welcome to this talk. Good to have you here for my talk about two things that a lot of people think don't go together, and that's open source and business. And I think that, I hope that I can keep you awake, because I realize that this is just after lunch, so the after lunch dip is going to kick in at some point. So I'm just going to shout if people start falling asleep, okay? So let me first introduce myself, because I'm not a very big part of the Cake PHP community. My name is Stefan Koopmanschap. I've been a PHP developer for a long time. I started somewhere in 97, 98. In my spare time, I'm also a radio DJ and a podcaster for a Dutch radio station. And I'm also a climate activist at Extinction Rebellion. So everyone who came here by plane, while you could have taken the train, shame on you. Anyway, I also run a company called Ingewikkeld. We do PHP development in general. So we use whatever framework is available or whatever framework a customer thinks they need, which can be Symfony, which can be Laravel, which could be Cake PHP, although the last time I used Cake PHP was a long time ago. So yeah, who knows? I mean, I've seen some interesting stuff here already yesterday and today. Maybe I should try it again, right? Do you think I should try it again? Yes, okay. So as I mentioned, I started in 97, 98 with PHP. That was PHP 3 back then. How many people have used PHP 3? I feel really sorry for you. That was interesting. Back in those days, it was very normal for us to mix up PHP and HTML and put SQL queries in there as well. That was very interesting. These days, at least, things are a lot more structured. And I mean, we saw earlier that you can even generate your JavaScript with PHP code now, which is really cool. Actually pretty quickly after I started with PHP, I also started using open source. I started basically using open source pretty quickly because I started downloading some scripts from the internet. There were websites like SourceForge, HotScripts. Can you remember HotScripts? That it was very easy for me to learn PHP because there were a lot of people out there opening up their code, allowing me to download and learn from that code, and of course start using it as well. Sometime after I started actually becoming an active contributor, I did some work for PHPBB, for instance. I did some work for Zen Framework, I did some work for Symfony, and also like in the general PHP community. So let's first start thinking about why we should contribute to open source. Because of course we can start looking at what we can do, but first let's look at why. A lot of people will know this one. And this is actually, of course, the comics like these are meant to be a bit funny, but it's funny because it's true. There is a lot of stuff out there, software out there, that is really built on top of like a very small component that is maintained by a single person for years already, and nobody realizes that, or maybe they do realize that, but they still accept that fact and still keep building on top of that one component. And that is a bit of a risk. Because what happens if they lose their job and they cannot make the time anymore to put in effort to maintain that project? Or what if they become sick? Or what if they do a career change and start becoming a bus driver and they don't want to write software anymore? Or what if they die? So one example that I want to give you is this example. This is me together with Bob den Otter. Bob den Otter was a good friend of mine. He was a big part of the Dutch weblogging community. He wrote some CMSs for blogging, PivotX, and later on he built a CMS on top of Symfony called Bold CMS. And on January 18 of this year, I got a direct message on Mastodon from a mutual friend of ours saying, Bob has passed away. And that was quite a shock. I knew he was in the hospital, but his last update a week before that was, everything's going to be fine. Doctor says they can cure me, so it's going to be great. And it wasn't. So I want to dedicate this talk to Bob, because he's been an inspiration for me for a long time. And this is why we should contribute to open source, because there are so many projects that are mostly maintained by one person. Now, luckily, Bolt already had a bit of a community around it, so that helps. But if there are those projects that are maintained by one person, what happens? So what happens to a project when someone loses interest, when they cannot maintain the project anymore? First step will be that it runs behind. It gets outdated, the dependencies are not updated anymore, and I'm not sure if you've run into this, probably, that when you do composer require and you cannot install a certain package anymore because it depends on another package that is outdated. Well, it's dependency hell, right? So then you get less updates or no updates at all, maybe not even security fixes anymore. Now, this is becoming a big problem. If you don't get security fixes anymore and there is an open security issue for the package, then you've got a problem. And in the worst case, of course, and that can happen as well, the package gets abandoned. And then you have to put in a lot of time and effort to replace that specific package for that specific functionality, which is really annoying. So, back to this picture. What if that project gets abandoned? What if there are no updates for that anymore? What if you build software for this huge enterprise company and that you earn a lot of money with that project, and now you have this problem? Especially if they have like all kinds of compliance things going on, then you have to invest a lot of time replacing that one package. So this is why everyone, not just individual developers, but especially also companies, should be reaching out to open source projects to help, to make sure that these open source projects have continuous support to their community. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and we'll get into that in a bit. But we need to, even for our own sanity and even for our own reasons, we need to keep supporting open source. So let me tell you some stories, some interesting stories that I've experienced over the years with different companies. So an important reason why I'm doing this talk is because I've been trying to do some kind of contribution to open source for a long time. One of the reasons why in recent years we've been pretty successful with my company contributing to open source is because I've seen it fail a lot of the times in the past. I've seen how trying to contribute to open source failed. So I'm going to tell you something about some of those situations. The first place where I saw a real effort to start contributing to open source was an employer that I worked for, and they really tried their best. They even had some of their own tools open sourced, and they gave developers room to keep on building those tools. And for people that wanted to contribute to other open source projects, they were able to do that in a limited way, but at least in a way that we could actually do some contributions and make sure that the packages that we used, we could contribute to that, so they kept existing. And they really went out of their way to facilitate that. They invested a lot of their profits back into the developers to help them grow, to help them contribute, to go to conferences, to get training, get the best hardware that was available so you could always have enough RAM in your system, and things like that. And they were pretty cool. But one of the things that they really hadn't thought of is that the economy fluctuates. So at some point you're in a peak and you can spend all the money you want. But then at some point it goes down. And if you don't have like a healthy form of income to be able to handle that downwards part of the economy, then you have a problem. So what happened was the economy went down, and their solution basically was from one day to the next, okay, we're going to stop all of our open source work because now everyone needs to make as much billable hours as possible. And the main reason for that was that even though they started investing and giving time for open source, they didn't change the rates that they charged to their customers. So they were actually getting in less money, but they still needed to do the work. So this is a good lesson, I think, is that if you want to contribute to open source, you need to make sure that your rates are supporting that. And if your customer says, but why should we pay for you to work on open source? It's because you get a lot of value out of that open source that we use for the project, for you, for that customer. So yeah, this is definitely a preventable problem. And even when the economy went back up, they kept the rates low, and then they didn't pick up on the open source contributions anymore because they just had to, keep the company running, which I can understand, but it's not really good for morale of the developers as well, if they were able to do that before and now they cannot anymore. So then there was another situation, different company, not the same company, that I worked for, and I personally really learned a lot from this. I was hired to be the tech lead at a company, and one of the reasons why was because I was so involved in open source at that point, and they wanted to become more involved in open source. So they wanted me to come in and help them get that started. So I discussed with management about this, and I proposed, well, we can try and do that 20% rule that Google was famous for at some point, where 20% of your time you can spend on open source stuff. Usually that would be the Fridays because it was easy to plan around that. My manager was really interested in that, and the financial director was also quite interested in that, and he came up with, okay, we need to adjust our rates a bit to be able to support that financially. Hey, this is a lesson that I learned earlier. That's good. So we ended up doing this. This is great. And it worked for a bit. And I got the feeling that I had solid support out of management. But then the trouble began. Because I had gotten my manager on board, I had gotten the financial guy on board. I didn't talk to one of the other owners, and that was the person responsible for sales. And he was very much of the opinion that open source was just there to use to earn money. So he decided he was not okay with this, even though I had already sorted this with the other management. He was not okay with this. So while he couldn't convince the other owner that we should stop with this, he still started selling projects as if we were still available for 40 hours a week. And then he put the problem on our plate when we were not able to deliver in time. And yeah, you can see the problem here. We were getting behind on projects because we were planning based on 32 billable hours a week, and he was planning on 40 billable hours per week for every developer. Yeah, that's not going to work. So that escalated at some point, and we had some, let's call it, heated discussions at some point. Yeah. This ended, well, eventually this ended with me leaving the company. But before that, already this ended with us having to stop this program of contributing to open source because that owner was just, you know, he kept on selling at full capacity. We were not able to do that. So getting started with open source in a company, especially in an existing company, isn't easy. And what you need to learn is that you have to have full support of everyone in your business, not just the financial person, not just your manager, but you have to have everyone on board. Also the sales, the project management, everyone needs to be on board and needs to change the way that they work to be able to facilitate this. And so even if you have that change in your rates to be able to financially support the change, you also need to change the planning and things like that. So all of the stakeholders, the full management, everyone. Well, as I mentioned, the rates, you need to adjust the rates to be able to cover the cost, because you still have to pay people for those hours, so you have to cover that cost by the rates that you charge for the billable hours. If you have the opportunity, and of course for existing companies this is hard, if you have the opportunity, do it right from the start. Because if you're used to it when you start your business, if you're used to that already from the start, it's a lot easier to keep this going. And that's what we did at Ingewikkeld. We did this from the start. We always did 4 days for the customer and 1 day for other stuff from the start. So let's talk about my company and how we started. As I said, we started with the 32 hours a week billable, and the Friday was meant for other stuff. And when we started, I was the only developer, and I was also the person doing the financial administration and things like that. So I wasn't actually doing a lot of open source because I also had to do these other tasks for running my business, and I wasn't really willing to spend 60 hours a week on the business, or 80 hours a week. So I wanted to do stuff like that on Friday so I could actually enjoy the weekend. But whenever I had a bit of time, I would do some research and development. I would do some contributions to open source. I would prepare talks. I would do a lot of stuff that wasn't actually earning me money, but was somehow giving back to the community. And as the business grew from just me as a developer to a couple of developers, we kept that going because this was great. And now, because we had multiple people, I would still be doing the administration, and that's fine. But now we had other people, and they could just spend their full Friday on open source stuff or on other things that contributed something to the community. So we would work for customers on Monday to Thursday, and then on Friday we would start doing fun stuff. And this is very important to realize, that contributing to open source does not always mean that you have to write code. There is a lot of other stuff that you can do to somehow contribute to the wider community. We wrote code, but we also organized an event where people could learn stuff, which is a great way of contributing. The people here, the organizers, they're doing a great job enabling us to learn, right? And that's also a great way of contributing to a community. Let's look at some of the projects that we did. Oh, that one was supposed to be at the end. We employed 2 main developers for the PHP Documenter tool, and they were spending a lot of their time working on PHP Documenter. Some of the new features that have been coming into that tool in recent months have been built during our hours. And I cannot take all the credits as our company, because they also spent a lot of their spare time on this. But we at least facilitated that they could spend some of their business time, some of their company time on building PHP Documenter. The picture you saw earlier was from WeCamp, which was an event on an island. People were sleeping in tents. We had satellite internet. We had no fixed electricity. It was a lot of fun. And there we were able to help people grow, both on a technical level, but also on a personal level. And it took us a whole lot of time to organize that, but it was so much fun. And then at some point, something happened with this global pandemic, so we couldn't do something in person anymore, so we started online conference, which was a free online conference, a one-day conference, and later we did the Ingewikkeld sessions as well, which was a live stream on a specific topic. That was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of... And this is stuff that you can do without... Okay, so this is a lot of work, stuff like this. So you don't want to do that on your own. But there's so much more. I mean, I asked around while preparing this talk inside Ingewikkeld, what else did you do on your Fridays? And people responded with, well, I created rules and contributed that to Rector, the project that allows you to easily refactor stuff. The Rector rules that they created, for instance, to migrate from mockery to prophecy. Or people added bug reports to the Psalm project. They added PHP 8 support for open source projects because some projects didn't have PHP 8 support yet. They sent in bug reports to Symfony. They contributed to a PSR, or they helped users of open source projects on Twitter, which was still a thing back then. So there's so many ways of contributing to open source that are not actually writing code. Just being in the CakePHP Slack, being in the support channel and answering questions, that is already a great contribution. So now, if you want to start contributing to open source as a company, then start small. Don't think we are going to open source our whole code base and now everything is fine and we are doing open source. You really don't want to do that. That's a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of risk as well, because you also have to maintain that. And that is a lot of work as well. But you can start small. If you work on a project for a customer and you encounter a bug, a small bug in whatever library that you are using at that point, even just reporting that bug is already a contribution. And if you can take it a step further and actually send in a pull request fixing that bug, that is even more great. Things like that. It's very small. You can even do it while you work on that feature. That is a great contribution. If you have a bit more time, you can also look at the issue tracker of an open source project and help triage issues. This is work that it takes a lot of effort for the maintainers of a project to do that kind of work. If you can take that work out of their hands, then they can focus on the bigger things, because that's what a maintainer should do, right? Focus on the bigger things in that project. It's small things like that. If you run into a problem with the code that you're working on, and you find a solution to that problem, and you figure out this is not in the documentation anywhere, you can add that to the documentation, or you can write on your own blog if you want to do that, but still then you share with the world your solution to that problem. It's small things like that that can help you get started with contributing to open source. And in a similar way, of course, if you are still on Twitter or you are on Mastodon or, the Slack I mentioned before, or discussion forums, things like that, just answering other people's questions helps. This is how I started with open source. I was a user of PHPBB, and at some point I had learned enough to be able to answer other people's questions. So I started answering other people's questions on the support forum. And at some point, the crew of PHPBB said, hey, we've noticed that you've been answering a lot of questions. Do you want to be on our support team? That's how I got started as an official contributor of an open source project. It's a very simple way of doing that. Then another question that I get a lot about starting with open source is, how do I choose what project to contribute to? And a lot of people immediately think, oh, I need to contribute to CakePHP, like a big project. I need to contribute to CakePHP, or I need to contribute to PHP itself, because this is what we use a lot. Sure, but there's already quite a few contributors. And if we go back to the start, there are also a lot of projects maintained by just 1 or 2 people. So look at the list of libraries that you use and identify one of those projects and start contributing to that. That has a much bigger impact because you remove the bus factor. Now there's more people that if one person gets run over by a bus, other people can pick up on that project. That's the stuff that can actually really have an impact on the open source community. So if you look at the developers that you have, the people that work for you, maybe not even developers. If your company wants to contribute to open source, I don't know about you, but I get the feeling with a lot of open source projects that if you look at their user interface, you can see that it's being built by a backend developer. So if you have some front-end developers available, you can also enable them to contribute to the front end of such a project. If you have UX developers available, please ask them to contribute to, for instance, Linux, because UX there, okay, this is my opinion, okay? But still, I mean, so it doesn't even have to be just backend developers that can contribute to open source. If you have marketing people, I mean, open source projects need a lot of help with marketing because they cannot do that themselves usually. So there you can also help. It doesn't even have to be developers. So look at who you have working for you and what they can contribute, and then start contributing that in one way or another. So to get back to that whole why question, why would we, or maybe not even why, but what can we get out of this? What can we get out of contributing to open source? Well, first of all, of course, contributing to open source is good open source citizenship. You know, if you take something from open source by using open source packages, you can give something back as well. That's just being nice. Despite what the owner that I mentioned earlier thought, that open source is just there to earn money on, no, you can also give back. And so, yeah, what you get is a continuity for open source projects. By starting to contribute, you make sure that that project can survive. Well, maybe not everything, but at least survive for longer than if there is no contributions there or just one person. Then there is a big benefit for the developers or the people that contribute. I shouldn't even say developers. The people that contribute, because when you do, let me see, there. When you do contribute, you also learn yourself, because you are working on something other than what you're usually working on. So it's a different context, which may need different solutions to the same problem, or it might even have different type of problems that you can learn from, that you can then go on and use in the next project where you might encounter that problem. So it's a relatively easy way of also investing in growing your knowledge and your experience. And then you also get free code reviews, basically. Because once you create that PR to that project, then the maintainer will actually have a look at your code and give you some feedback on what you've been doing, how you solve the problem, and that feedback can also help you grow. So that's also a great way. Like the first 2 pull requests that I sent to open source projects, they got rejected. The first one, because I was solving a problem that wasn't there according to the maintainer, which I still not sure I agree with, but okay. And the second one, because the solution that I created was not the right solution according to the maintainer. The problem that I created the PR for still got solved eventually, because someone got inspired by my PR to solve it in a different way. So that problem eventually got solved. It was just not my code that solved it. And that can still happen, but that's fine. That's fine. Eventually, the problem got solved. Also, contributing to open source can be great marketing. There are a lot of companies out there looking for developers, for instance. And if they start looking around for job openings and they see your name in some open source project, then they already know, oh, this is a cool company, because they also give back to the community. They don't just take from it. Or if a potential customer has, I don't know, some kind of e-commerce system and they run into an issue with that and they start searching on the internet for a solution and they see your company name connected to that project, they might just contact you because now you're the expert on that project. So it's a great way of marketing your company to both potential customers but also to potential developers. So this is a lot of reasons, but the most important reason for a lot of business people is money. It's all about money. And doing open source can actually earn you money. Of course, these are specific situations. If you think of WordPress, you think of specific companies, right? Automatic, for instance. They earn a lot of money with WordPress. WordPress is open source, but they are the company behind that and selling a lot of services around that. Symfony has a similar company. Well, CakePHP, I think, has a company behind it as well. But it doesn't even have to be the official company behind it, because Ingewikkeld does not create open source. As in, we don't have our own project. Well, we have some small libraries, but that's negligible. But we still offer training, for instance, or consulting for Symfony, for Laravel. We could do CakePHP, probably, although I'd rather you do that, because I know not enough about CakePHP. And I had a discussion earlier. One thing that, for instance, Laravel community has solved a lot is the monetization of open source work. They have a lot of packages where you pay a relatively low fee to be able to use that, a low license fee to be able to use that. And this is something that I don't see a lot in open source yet, but it's a great way of being able to also ensure the continuity of a project. As long as it brings in money from license fees, even if it's just a small amount per installation or whatever, that still makes sure that you can keep on working on that project, because you're still getting in money from that project. So that's a great way of being able to earn some money in this way. And if like a small company from a small country like the Netherlands is able to contribute to open source, like we have been doing with Ingewikkeld, then I'm pretty sure that bigger companies should be able to do that as well. How many of you have heard of the PHP Foundation? A lot of hands. Okay, so not everyone. Okay, I'm going to explain. The PHP Foundation is a non-profit organization that you can donate money to that, and that money is being used to pay people to work on PHP, on the language. So where in like a couple of years ago, the PHP was basically that small project in the image at the start. There was one person doing core development, and that was about it. And now the PHP Foundation is there, and we have several people being paid to work on the language. And that means that not only do we get like a regular release schedule, we get a lot of new cool features and some lesser cool features, but still, I mean, we get a lot of cool new stuff in the language itself that now everyone else can start using. If you look at the website, the PHP Foundation website, they have they are very transparent, so they have a full list of everyone that donates to that project. If I look at that, then I'm quite shocked. There's a lot of individual developers that donate money, like you, me. We don't donate a lot of money, but we still donate a bit of money, right? A small amount. But if you look at the amount of companies who earn a lot of money using PHP that don't donate, it's just a small amount of companies that actually donate. So if you want to take one thing out of this, I would say go back to your business and tell them to start donating even a small amount of money to the PHP Foundation, because this is what everyone here is earning their money with. It shouldn't be that hard. And if, of course, you have the time, your spare time or even company time, to be able to contribute code or triaging bugs or whatever, doing something like that actively, that is also great, because that also helps move projects forward. And that's it. Any questions? No questions? I won't bite unless you want to. There's one question there.
You guys.
Thank you for that. Did you find that bringing your customers in to supporting your endeavors was as equally challenging, or were they on board with it too?
So within Ingewikkeld, we didn't really actively, we communicate on our website that we contribute to open source, but we didn't actively talk to customers to tell them that we were doing open source contributions. We just went ahead and did it. Of course, as I mentioned, we did it from the start, so that's a bit easier. So for existing customers, it's sometimes a bit harder if you just tell them, okay, we're going to raise all the rates 20% now to cover open source development. So what I did at some point for a customer that also wanted to do this was to keep, existing customers would keep their existing rate, but every new customer would get like a higher rate, and for the existing customers, we would gradually, over the years, raise the rates a bit. And that worked well for them. They wouldn't have the big margins. For a while, they wouldn't have the margins that they used to have. But they were still able to support the whole open sourcing, contributing to open source.
Thank you.
Yeah? Any more questions? No? Okay. How many people is in my company is the question here. I'll just repeat it. We used to be with 5 developers. Right now it's just 2. We had some changes internally, and yeah, so it's 2 developers right now. One of them is still one of the maintainers of PHP Documenter. And at some point we'll have more developers again, and we'll keep on doing what we're doing. Any more questions? Okay, so I have a blog and the company website, of course. I'm on Mastodon. I still have an account on Twitter, but I don't use it anymore, so don't mention me there. And I also have this last link, and that's the one important link, because I link to some interesting resources on contributing to open source there. So if you take anything from this talk, take that link, and that will give you more information later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I didn't follow the rules because I just literally mentioned you on Twitter with that.